Your jaw tightens the moment their name comes up in conversation. Not because you are still furious, because some part of you is still waiting for an apology that will not come, an explanation that would not even satisfy you if it did, some acknowledgement that what they did actually cost you something real. That waiting has a name, and it is not grief. It is the space where reconstruction was supposed to start, and never did. Most men who have been failed by someone they trusted, a partner, a son, a man they promoted, a friend they vouched for in front of other people, spend years defending the wound instead of building past it. They do not even notice the difference between the two. The reason most men stay stuck after someone fails them is not the betrayal itself. It is a specific pattern, waiting for the person who failed them to close the story instead of closing it themselves. What follows is not another explanation of why they failed you. It is the six-part discipline of the man who stopped waiting on them to finish the story and finished it himself. The wait before the work. Most men who have tried to move past this have done everything right on the surface. They stopped bringing it up. They act normal around the person or around the memory of them. What follows is the explanation for why that surface calm does not fix what is underneath it. What this actually feels like. It shows up at strange hours. You are driving, and the conversation replays itself, except this time you say the thing you did not say then. You are in a meeting. Someone hesitates the way that person used to hesitate right before they let you down, and your stomach drops before your mind has even finished the comparison. You have gotten good at hiding it. You do not talk about it anymore. But you still measure new people against the shape of that old failure, without meaning to, without wanting to. This is not weakness. A man who leads other people, who has built something real, a team, a business, a family that depends on his judgment, does not get to fall apart the way other people are allowed to. So the wound does not disappear. It gets managed, filed, handled quietly at 2 a.m. while everyone around him assumes he is fine, because he has trained himself to look fine. There is a second layer to this that almost no one names directly. It is not only the person who failed you that you are managing. It is every decision that came afterward. Whether to promote the next man who reminds you of him, whether to extend the next contract the way you extended the last one, whether to believe your own son when he tells you it will not happen again. The failure did not stay contained to one relationship. It attached itself quietly to your judgment about every relationship that came after it. And you have been running that judgment on a subtle deficit ever since, without fully admitting it to yourself. Here is what almost no one tells you about that management. It is not neutral. Every hour spent auditing what they did to you is an hour not spent building what comes after it. The account never closes. And a man who has spent years closing every other account in his life, financial, professional, physical, somehow leaves this one open indefinitely, as if leaving it open is a form of loyalty to how much it hurt. It is not loyalty. It is a stall, and the stall has a specific mechanism behind it. There is also a version of this that shows up specifically in men who carry responsibility for other people. You do not get to say out loud that a business partner gutted you, or that a son you defended in front of the whole family lied to your face, or that a lieutenant you promoted past better candidates folded the moment it mattered. Saying it out loud would mean admitting your judgment missed something in front of the very people who rely on that judgment to be sound. So it stays private. It gets carried alone at full weight, with none of the relief that comes from another person simply saying, out loud, that what happened to you was real and it was not fair. The mechanism. There is a specific reason this waiting never resolves on its own, and it has nothing to do with how much closure you eventually get. The mechanism is simple, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in every relationship you have touched since. You are treating the failure as an event that needs an ending, instead of a material that needs a use. An event needs someone else to close it, an apology, a confession, a moment of accountability that may never arrive. A material needs only you and what you decide to build with it. Consider how differently this plays out in the two men who experience the exact same failure. The same partner steals the same deal. The same son says the same lie. The same trusted lieutenant folds under the same pressure and lets the team down at the exact same moment. One man spends the next 3 years explaining the injustice of it to anyone who will listen, refining the story each time until it is airtight, waiting for the day the other person finally admits what they did. The other man spends that same 3 years building something new on the exact spot where the failure happened. A better filter, a clearer standard, a version of himself that could not be failed the same way twice. Both men experienced the identical event. Only one of them is still living inside it. The man who stays stuck is the man still waiting for the event to end. The man who rebuilds is the man who picked up the material and started building, whether or not the other person ever explained themselves. This distinction matters because it changes what you are actually optimizing for. If you are waiting for the event to end, your progress is entirely in someone else's hands. Their willingness to apologize, their capacity for honesty, their decision to finally see what it cost you. You have no control over any of those 3 things, and building your recovery on top of them means building on ground that was never yours to build on. If you are building with the material instead, your progress depends only on decisions you make, what you do with your attention, what standards you set going forward, who you decide to become next. That ground is entirely yours, available today, regardless of what the other person ever does or says. There are 6 specific things this second man does differently. Not 6 feelings, 6 actions, deliberate, repeatable, and available to you starting today, regardless of whether the person who failed you ever says a single word about it. Principle 1. The first thing he does is stop auditing the wound. Auditing looks productive. It feels like understanding. You replay the conversation. You catalog the warning signs you missed. You build an airtight case for exactly how and why they failed you. It feels like preparation, as if the next replay might finally produce the insight that makes the pain make sense. It is actually maintenance. You are keeping the wound in working condition, polishing the evidence so it stays sharp enough to hurt on command, sharp enough to justify the next sleepless hour spent on it. This is a harder habit to break than it looks, because the auditing disguises itself as diligence. A man who takes his responsibilities seriously is used to reviewing his decisions. Did I structure that deal correctly? Did I read that person correctly? What would I do differently? That instinct serves him well in business and badly here, because there is nothing left to decide. The decision already happened. The failure already occurred. Every additional review is not producing new information. It is producing the same conclusion at a higher emotional cost each time. The man who rebuilds closes the file, not because the failure did not matter, because he has recognized that every replay strengthens the grip the event has on him, rather than loosening it. He reviews it once, extracts what is useful, and refuses the 10th review, the 20th, the one at 2 a.m. that changes nothing except how tired he is in the morning. Closing the file does not mean forgetting what happened, and it does not mean deciding it was acceptable. It means the file has been read, the relevant facts extracted, and further reading produces no new information, only the same conclusion arrived at with more fatigue each time. A man who has run a business for any length of time already understands this instinct in every other part of his life. He does not reopen a closed deal every week to relitigate whether it was fair. He closes it, learns from it, and moves his attention to the next decision in front of him. The wound deserves exactly the same discipline he already applies everywhere else. Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are calmed. A headland does not replay each wave. It does not catalogue which wave hit hardest or rehearse a better angle for standing against the next one. It simply keeps the shape that lets water break against it without being moved by it. That shape is not indifference. It is structure, built once, maintained by standing there, not by reliving every collision. Notice something specific about that image. The headland does not become calm because the sea stops being rough. It becomes calm because its own shape does not change in response to the roughness. The failure does not have to stop being real for you to stop being moved by it every time it comes up. Write in the comments right now, one word for what you are still auditing on repeat, the version of the story you have played more times than it deserves. The man who closes the file gains something specific, time and attention he was spending on a closed transaction. What he does with that reclaimed attention is the second thing that separates him from the man still stuck. Principle 2. The second thing he does is separate the person from the pattern. When someone fails you badly enough, the mind does something efficient and dangerous at the same time. It generalizes. That person failed you, so people in general become a threat. That kind of trust failed you, so trust itself becomes the enemy. It feels like protection, the same way flinching after a burn feels like protection. It is actually a tax you now pay on every future relationship, guilty until proven innocent, for a crime someone else committed. This generalization is quiet, and it is expensive. It shows up as the hesitation before you back a promising young hire, the way you once backed the man who let you down. It shows up as the extra scrutiny you apply to your own son's explanation, scrutiny that has nothing to do with him and everything to do with someone else who came before him. The people paying for the old failure are, more often than not, people who had nothing to do with it. The man who rebuilds does something more precise. He asks what, specifically, was in his control to notice, decide, or act on differently, and separates that from what was simply the other person's character, which was never his to control in the first place. He does not forgive the person by pretending the failure did not happen. He forgives himself for the part he keeps assigning himself that was never actually his. And critically, he stops assigning that person's character to the next person who has done nothing yet to earn the suspicion. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Their character was never in your power. Your judgment about who gets access to you next time, that is entirely in your power, and it is the only part of this that was ever yours to work on. Everything else, including whatever made that person capable of failing you the way they did, belonged to them alone, and no amount of analysis on your part was ever going to change it in advance. This separation is not an intellectual exercise you complete once. It has to be applied deliberately, in the moment, whenever the next person triggers the old comparison. It sounds like a specific sentence run silently before judging someone new. This is not the person who failed me, and I will judge what is actually in front of me, not the shadow of what happened before. Said enough times, in enough real moments, it stops being a discipline and becomes simply how the man sees people, clearly, one at a time, instead of through the residue of the one who let him down. Principle 3. The third thing he does is stop treating trust as a feeling and start treating it as a system. Most men who have been failed swing to one of two extremes. They either keep extending the same blind trust they always did, because guarding themselves feels like becoming someone they do not want to be, someone cynical or cold. Or they seal off completely, extending trust to no one, mistaking a wall for wisdom. Both extremes are still reactions to the failure. Neither one is a decision made by the man who is actually running his own life. Both are the failure still steering, years after it happened. The man who rebuilds designs criteria instead. Specific, observable standards someone has to actually meet before they get access to the parts of his life that matter. His time, his resources, his real opinion, his backing in front of other people. Not a feeling of whether he likes someone. A system he applies the same way regardless of how persuasive or likable the person in front of him happens to be, because likability was very likely present in the person who failed him too. This is uncomfortable to build, because it requires admitting that the old system, whatever instinct or loyalty or history was running it before, produced the failure you are still carrying. A new system means admitting the old one had a flaw. Most men would rather protect their old judgment than admit it needs revision, because revising it feels like admitting they were foolish rather than simply unlucky. The man who rebuilds does not have that luxury and does not want it. He would rather build something accurate than protect a version of himself that already proved insufficient once. In practice, this system looks less dramatic than people expect. It is not a wall, and it is not a list of rules taped to the inside of his mind. It is closer to a sequence, small commitments first, observed under low stakes, before any real access is granted. Does this person do the small thing they said they would do, on the day they said they would do it, without being reminded? Does their account of a minor disagreement match what actually happened, or does it already begin shading toward whatever makes them look better? None of this requires suspicion. It only requires attention, applied consistently, to people who have not yet earned the exemption from it that the last person was given far too early. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The failure is not separate from the system you are building. It is the raw material the system is made of. Every criterion in it exists because something specific was missing the last time, and you noticed exactly what it was. A system built from an actual failure is stronger than one built from theory, because theory has never been tested against someone determined to disappoint it. Say this out loud right now, even quietly. The specific standard you are adding to your life because of what happened. Not a vague feeling, a real criterion. Write it in the comments in one sentence. Principle 4. The fourth thing he does is stop needing the apology to move. This is the one that takes the longest because it feels like justice is owed. And in a sense it is. But justice owed and progress required are two different accounts, and the man who ties his forward motion to the first one hands the second one over to whoever failed him. Indefinitely, since they may never decide to pay what they owe, and some men never do, not because they cannot, but because admitting the full weight of what they did would cost them something they are not willing to pay either. The man who rebuilds separates the two. He still believes the apology would be fair. He simply stops making his own life depend on whether fairness ever arrives. He has noticed something specific. Every month he waited was a month the other person did not think about the debt at all, while he thought about almost nothing else. The waiting was never actually costing them anything. It was only ever costing him his sleep, his focus, the parts of his attention that could have gone toward the people who never failed him and are still standing right in front of him, uncredited for it. This does not mean pretending the debt does not exist. It means refusing to let an unpaid debt function as a lien on your entire future. A debt that is owed and never collected is still, eventually, just a fact about the past. One fact among many, not the interest rate applied to every day that comes after it. The man who rebuilds lets it remain a fact. He simply stops letting it compound. No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity. The deception was never that people are trustworthy. It was believing that trust, once given, would always be protected the way you protect it yourself. Removing that deception does not make you colder. It makes you accurate. And an accurate man builds on ground he has actually tested, not ground he assumed was solid because it looked solid before. The prosperity Seneca is describing is not money. It is the comfortable assumption that the people around you will treat your trust the way you would treat theirs. Losing that assumption early, deliberately, on your own terms, costs far less than losing it the way you already lost it once. Principle 5. The fifth thing he does is turn the failure into a filter instead of a scar. A scar only registers pain when touched. A filter does something more useful. It screens what comes next quietly before damage accumulates. The man still stuck treats the failure as a scar, flinching at anything that resembles it, sometimes flinching at people who do not resemble it at all, except in some surface detail his mind latched onto. The man who rebuilds treats it as data, a filter he runs every new relationship through before he extends real trust again. This filter is specific, not paranoid. It asks concrete questions under pressure. Does this person's behavior match their words when nothing is being observed? Do they take responsibility for small failures quickly, or do they explain them away with increasing sophistication the larger the failure gets? A man who runs this filter consistently stops being surprised by the next failure because he catches the pattern at a small, low-cost moment, a missed deadline, a half-truth about something minor, instead of a large, expensive one that costs him a deal, a reputation, or a relationship he cannot easily replace. This is the piece almost nobody teaches men who have been failed at a high level, men who run companies, men who raise families, men whose judgment other people depend on every day. The goal was never to never be failed again. That is not available to anyone, no matter how careful the filter. People are not fully predictable, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of denial. The goal is to be failed smaller, sooner, and less often, because the filter is doing its job before the stakes get large, catching the pattern in its early, cheap version rather than its late, expensive one. There is a quiet confidence that comes from running a filter like this, one that has nothing to do with becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It comes from knowing that if someone does eventually fail you again, it will not be because you missed something you could have caught. It will simply be because people, on occasion, fail each other. And no filter built by a reasonable man removes that risk completely. The filter is not there to guarantee you are never failed again. It is there to guarantee that when you are, it costs you far less than it did the last time, because you saw the shape of it early. If you have built a filter like this since your own experience, write the single word for what it screens for first, the one thing you now notice before anything else. Principle 6. The sixth thing he does is the one that actually finishes the reconstruction. He stops letting the failure define who he is allowed to become next. This is different from forgiveness and different from moving on. Those are things you do to the past. This is something you do to your own identity going forward. Most men, without noticing, quietly adopt a smaller version of themselves after being failed. More guarded, more cynical, a little less willing to bet on anyone, including themselves. They call this wisdom. Often it is just contraction wearing wisdom's clothes, a shrinking dressed up as maturity so it does not have to be examined too closely. The man who finishes the rebuild refuses that contraction. He does not become who the failure would have made him if he let it write the ending by default. He decides, separately from what happened, who he is choosing to become next, and he builds toward that, using what happened as material, not as a verdict on what he is allowed to be from now on. He notices the difference between a man shaped by what happened to him and a man who used what happened to him as one input among many in deciding who to become, and he deliberately chooses to be the second one. This is the last and hardest thing to build because it requires ongoing daily proof rather than a single decision made once and left alone. Every time the old contraction offers itself as the easier option, trust no one this much again, expect less from everyone going forward. He has to choose the wider version of himself again, on purpose, in that specific moment. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. That sentence is not comfort. It is a responsibility, and it is the exact opposite of what most men do with a failure this size. Most men let the event write the next chapter by default, simply by never deciding anything else on purpose. The man who rebuilds writes the next chapter on purpose, in full view of what happened, and lets it stand as proof of what he built, rather than proof of what was done to him. Before you go, here is what all six of this add up to in plain terms. The wound does not need more auditing, it needs to be closed as a file. The person is not the same thing as the pattern, and only the pattern is yours to work with. Trust is not a feeling you extend again by instinct, it is a system you build on purpose. The apology you are owed is a separate account from the progress you are required to make, and you do not need the first one to start the second. The failure is not a scar to protect, it is a filter that makes every relationship after it more accurate. And the man you become next is not something the failure gets to decide. You decided, on purpose, starting with what you do today. None of this requires them to ever say a word. None of it requires an apology that may never come, an explanation that would not satisfy you anyway, or a version of the story where they finally understand what it cost you. It only requires you to stop waiting for someone else to close the account and start building on the ground you actually have. Today, pick one of these 6, not all 6, one, and do it in the next 24 hours. Close the file on one specific replay you have run too many times. Or write down the one real criterion your new trust system will require, starting with the next person who asks for access to something that matters. Small, specific, done today, not someday, not when you feel ready. If this is the kind of thinking you want to keep building, this channel is here every week. Every video takes one idea further than the last. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.